Hello, how are you? Good morning. So those of you that are coming in, keep on coming in. We're going to go ahead and get started just to kind of keep things on time. My name is Jim McGee, and my wife Sonny and I help lead the efforts for the Parents Committee. For those of you that are in the room, that were in the room last fall, you may recall that we announced a very exciting raffle. So here with me this morning is Amy Gorman of the Development Office and also a Taft parent to help fulfill that exciting moment. So as you may recall, we had a little bit of a contest, if you will, in order to inoculate parents of seniors from this terrible disease called senioritis. We encourage people to participate in the fund early. To do that, if you were a parent of a senior and participated before December 31st, you got your name in a hat to draw for one of two sets of 2 front row seats to graduation. Think about it. You've done all this over the years. It'd be actually nice to see it. It is a beautiful day. I saw it last year. It's an amazing ceremony. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and draw 2 names out of the hat. If your name is called, we'd love for you to just stand up. But name number 1 is... If we can pronounce it, I'm going to say it.
Mark and Julie Malika.
Oh, I gotta pronounce that. No, you go ahead. Are they here? Uh-oh. Do you have to be present to win?
Bart and Claire Johnston.
Wow. Well done. The Johnsons I have not seen. We've got some very nice certificates that we will mail them, I guess. So thanks for giving us an attention for a few minutes here. Really just kind of wanted to remind everybody what it is that we do. So what is the Parents Committee? Again, it's a group of 51 volunteer families whose primary purpose is to raise awareness of and encourage participation in the Parents Fund. The Parents Fund is that portion of the annual appeal that comes from parent contributions. Many of you may be thinking, wow, I wrote a big tuition check. The sad reality is it is a big tuition check. Even sadder is it only covers a portion of the cost of a Taft education. So the school relies on a few things to kind of bridge that deficit. We have some ancillary income from renting the hockey rink or the golf course. Not a lot, but it's better than nothing. We also have, very fortunate that we have an endowment, and as a result, some endowment income. That's the good news. The challenge is that it's about half the size of many of our peer schools, so as a result, it's half the amount of endowment income. So the broadest part of funding for that deficit is the annual appeal, the biggest portion of which comes from alumni, have been broadly supportive over the years, also have some friends of Taft. And the portion of the community that's nearest and dearest to all of our hearts, that's the parents. And the parents at Taft have a very long-standing tradition of broadly supporting the Parents Fund. So remarkably, for the last 22 years now, more than 90% of the parent body has participated in the Parents Fund. This is incredible. Our goal, of course, is 100%. We never ask our kids to go out there and perform at 90% level, but we certainly want to get in the A range or over a 90 in terms of participation. So the good news is 48% of you that are in the audience have already participated. To everybody that has participated, thank you. It helps me sleep a little more soundly at night, having gotten almost halfway to our target. The flip side of that coin is 52% of you are in the process of participating or considering such thing. So what a great way to show thanks to all the wonderful faculty, staff, and administration for everything they do here at Taft for our children. I know Willy announces this at a spring meeting to the whole team, and they all put a smile on their face knowing that they have that broad support from the families that send their children here. So what am I asking today, or what's going to happen in the weeks to come? You will receive a letter, I think goes out on Monday. Those of you that have yet to participate will receive that letter just encouraging you to give some consideration to participating. Note, I have not said give until it hurts or anything like that. That's not the goal here. Having said that, if you're feeling extra, a little more philanthropic and had a better year, perhaps, of course, it would always be welcome. But really what we're looking for is just participation. So sit down as a family and kind of think about what's the right number, and no number is too low, really driving towards that 100% goal. Shortly thereafter, you'll be contacted by one of the parent committee volunteers. Keep in mind they are volunteers. These are people that are 100% supportive of the school, but in addition to their financial support, they're willing to give back some time. So when they call or email or whatever the case may be, keep in mind they are not highly paid, highly trained telesolicitors. Rather, they are just people that like Taft. Their kids are having a great experience at Taft and just calling to encourage some participation and answer any questions that you might have. So with all that said, again, thanks to everybody that has participated, and thanks to everybody else that is in the process in the next weeks, days, months to come to at least considering participation. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to the prime speaker, Willy, for some wonderful words of wisdom.
Good morning to all of you. Delighted to see you. Thank you so much for coming. We are not going to open up a satellite campus in Palm Beach. It has been a grim couple weeks, and my mother, who was raised in Minnesota and was a longtime teacher, told me that when I gave them a snow day that I had gone soft. So it is. Well, let me tell you what I want to talk about today. It's a serious topic, and the title of the topic, the title of my talk is School Culture and Challenge on Hammering Away in the Beaten Paths, and that'll make sense in a moment. And I'm going to talk about something serious, and it's about how private boarding schools try to create an ideal campus. That is, how we try to create the ideal culture of a school, and the ways in which drugs and alcohol are a challenge to that. And you may, I think this is sort of a lowering of the voice, and everyone takes a deep breath and says, oh my God, what's he going to talk about? We should absolutely be talking about drugs and alcohol and teenagers. And if I were not, you should be asking, why aren't you? Because this is a national issue, and I think about it all the time. Even as our world today is one that Horace Taft wouldn't recognize, he certainly knew that teenagers did dumb things and broke the rules. I like one of the letters he wrote to his friend Sherman Thatcher. You'll recall that in the fall I talked about his friendship with Thatcher. The two of them both founded schools, our school 125 years ago in 1890. And in 1902, on January 7th, right when the term was about to begin, Taft wrote to Thatcher in a refrain that I recognize well. Thatcher and his wife had sadly just lost their infant child. They would lose ultimately 3 children at birth. He tried to express his condolences to him, but then he moved on to the work of the office, perhaps, I think, knowing that nothing would console his friend more than a little bit of commiseration about leading a school of teenagers and with a long winter term ahead. He wrote, "The amount of smoking here does not trouble me as far as the actual physical harm is conceived. That must be practically nothing. But the fact that it goes on in spite of the rule, and that otherwise square boys think evasion of this rule is justifiable, is always a thorn in my flesh." And I think, no kidding. It's a remarkable thing for us to read today, isn't it? With all this scoffing about the health risks of smoking, it just shows us that the world changes and schools change depending on medical research, depending on federal law, but depending on social mores. But even more than that, it reminds us that schools of adolescence have always had to manage the fact that teenagers will use drugs and they will break rules, including nice and honest ones. I like this sort of antique phrase, including those square boys. This is the work of all secondary schools at all times and in all places. And to be clear, and I want this to be absolutely clear, there is nothing this year or this month that prompts this talk. I am always thinking about how we as adults, and I mean all of us, parents and faculty, try to help teenagers navigate the choppy waters of adolescence. We have talked about this topic in all of the 30-some years I've been here. If you find a school, if you find a high school where the leadership of the school is not talking about drugs and alcohol, it must be on another planet. And you should be asking, why aren't they? And I'd make one last comment about this. It's a serious topic, for sure. And we should treat it as such. But I think it's important that we also have some perspective and maybe even a bit of humor, and that we remind ourselves that this is a pretty happy and healthy campus. It's a wonderful place to be a student and a faculty member. Drug and alcohol use is not a Taft issue. It's not even a private boarding school issue. It's a national issue. And we're dealing with it today, so are our peers, and we will be tomorrow. They're teenagers, after all. They do really dumb things. They even do dangerous things. They always have. You think of them when you think about the comment about coffee. Do stupid things faster and with more energy. You think I asked for perspective and humor. I remember the first student in my career I confronted for drinking. It was a lower mid boy. I was on HDT2. He stumbled into my apartment on a Saturday night to sign in. He was 14. He was about 5 feet tall. I looked at him and said, "You need to be honest with me. Have you been drinking?" He slurred, "No, Mr. Mack, I'm just allergic to Connecticut." I told him we had a treatment for it. I want you to think of this talk in 3 chapters. The first chapter, the longest, is about what we strive to be as a school culture and the challenges to that culture. I then want to talk briefly about why the teenager is really, in a sense, and I use this in quotes ironically, the perfect user. And then I want to suggest at the end what I think we can do to confidently and explicitly and positively and enthusiastically take on the challenge. So let's start with the question, what is it that you want your campus to feel like? I was talking to a father on the way in. We were talking about organizations and the idea that you want to start with culture. You want to start with mission. You want to say, who are we trying to be? And you repeat it over and over again. In the education profession, I think I would be possibly described as what's called a backward design guy, in that I subscribe to that educational model that we sometimes do well to begin with what educational outcomes we're looking for, and then we strategically design everything back from there. It's called the backward design model. You can do this with campus culture. I believe we should ultimately be this, and I use this phrase several times today. I think as a campus, we should be a high health, high energy, and high achievement campus. Now, it's hardly a controversial goal. It's one I've coincidentally spoken a lot with a guy named MacMullen, who's the head of Thatcher in California. He's a friend of mine. He's a leader in the field. And I think he's one of the most interesting spokesmen on the question of educational culture. I've learned a lot from him. What campus wouldn't you want to have be characterized by being physically, spiritually, and psychologically healthy? What campus wouldn't be well served to be marked by energy in classrooms and hallways and dorms? Or a campus that saw high achievement in arts and academics and athletics? It's a very good place to begin. Let's design backward from the idea that everything we do in order to meet our mission should be designed with the idea that we want to be high energy, right? Energy everywhere you see it on campus. We want to have high health, and we want to have high achievement. But the question, of course, that you have to ask is then, what's the biggest challenge to being those things? What's the biggest challenge to being a high health, high energy, high achievement place? Certainly, I think the distractions of social media can be. I cannot imagine the number of hours and energy that students waste with social media. Clearly, that's an obstacle. I think excessive stress, internally, externally sourced, can be an obstacle to health and energy. I think worries about familial issues can clearly be an obstacle. You're a teenager worried about your grandparents' health or your parents' marriage. It's hard to have the energy and focus you need. Physical health can be an obstacle. If you're sick, it's hard to do well at the school. But the challenge that I'm most interested in, and frankly I think is the greatest challenge, is the ways in which drugs and alcohol among teenagers can pose a challenge to becoming the things we want to do. So we have to start by looking at the national level of what we know about teenage drug use and alcohol use. And when I use the phrase drug use, I really mean all the drugs. Nicotine, alcohol, prescribed medication, and marijuana. Let's start with alcohol. And we do well to really understand the national picture. The National Institute of Health has done, since 1975, has done a survey called the Monitoring the Future Study. In 2014, it was a typical size. It involved about 40,000 students, about 375 schools, private and public schools. It's a terrific study. It's online. You can find all the data you'd like. I encourage you to look at it. There is some good news, by the way, with alcohol. And I quote here Michael Botticelli, who says, "This year's MTF data show promising signs on declining rates of adolescent substance use. By several measures, and in particular, teenage and college binge drinking and rates of DUI, both are down significantly, and that is really good news." What are the numbers for alcohol use among adolescents? 37% of seniors and 23% of 10th graders report to drinking in the last month. Okay, both of those figures are down from 2009. Even acknowledging the decline, however, alcohol use among teenagers continues to be a major health issue and challenge for the entire nation. The majority of ER visits, sexual and physical abuse, and car accidents all are related to alcohol. That won't surprise you. Boys are more likely to drink than girls, but not by a lot. White adolescents drink more than Hispanics, who drink more than African Americans. The higher the education level and income level of parents, the higher the percentage of alcohol use among teenagers. So if I pulled it together, the majority of high school students do not use alcohol. That number is growing, and it has grown over the last 5 years. The use cuts across all lines and increases in age. That is, seniors are more likely to drink than a freshman. And the higher the income level, the more likely there's use. In sum, there are negative outcomes. There's some good things, some things to feel good about, but I think it still continues to be a major health concern. What about marijuana use? There's a lot of data, and there have been a number of interesting studies done recently. There's bad news. After a decline of many years since 2005, and I'm quoting the head of the study, marijuana use is at a 30-year high among high school seniors. Pot is the most commonly used illicit drug. It holds steady with last year with 16% of 10th graders and 21% of 12th graders reporting to using in the last month. So seniors, roughly 1 in 5 report to using once in the last month. Whites smoke more than blacks, who smoke more than Hispanics, who smoke more than Asian and Pacific Islanders. Pot is described in these studies as, and I'm using the quote, easily accessible by a majority of teenagers in their schools, and that means public and private schools. Potency in marijuana has increased threefold since 1995. We often hear the phrase "it is accurate." The marijuana that is smoked today is very different than the marijuana that was smoked when we were teenagers. Here's the most significant fact, and you absolutely should know this. The percentage of teenagers who think that smoking pot is bad for you has declined dramatically in recent years, from 27% in 2009 to 16% today, so roughly halved. It is bad news. It's pretty safe to say that that decline is a result of the national debate. Medical use, decriminalization, legalization. Clearly, those help explain why increasing numbers of teenagers believe that marijuana use is harmless. I would argue, and I hope you would join me in this argument, I want them to know the exact opposite. And mainly because brain imaging technology we have today allows us to measure the architecture, function, and structure of gray matter that's on pot with a level of sophistication that's entirely different than that 1987 image, "Your brain is on drugs," you remember, with the frying pan and the egg. We have much more sophistication now. The fact is, there could not be a worse period in development than adolescence to use marijuana. Neuroscientist Francis Jensen, the author of Teenage Brain, it's a book I highly recommend, it's terrific, writes this: "Cannabis locks on longer than in the adult brain. For instance, if they were to get high over the weekend, the effects would still be there on Thursday or Friday later that week. An adult wouldn't have that same long-term effect." Just think about what she said about being a student in a demanding high school. And if you dig even deeper, and I've done this in the past years, it's really important to think about what the neuroscience tells us. And to get this, I read a study called Considering Cannabis, the Effects of Regular Cannabis Use on Neurocognition in Adolescents. It has 5 authors. It's a remarkable work. I recommend it. Now, by the way, I'd be happy to send this talk to anyone who wants to read it to be able to see these citations. The authors remind us that adolescence is a time, and I quote, a dynamic time marked by significant neurodevelopmental changes. This period of ongoing neurodevelopment may be sensitive in a period in which drugs can exert a greater impact on the brain compared with exposure to adults. The data does not lie. In terms of cognition with regular users, and for this study, regular users meant using once a month, or more than once a month, studies show multiple cognitive deficits, including poorer attention, verbal memory, psychomotor speed, and that's a list that should get your attention when you think about what we ask of students every day on this school. Advances in diffusion tensor imaging of brain architecture are even more instructive. The authors cite numerous changes in brain structure among teenage cannabis users. A typical sentence lists changes to, and I quote, larger hippocampal volumes and decreased orbital frontal cortex and so on. I don't know exactly what that means, but I know what this next sentence means. The above structural alterations in gray matter were associated with increased executive dysfunction, mood symptoms, poor verbal memory, and novelty seeking, suggesting that these structural abnormalities, and here I love the understatement, are not advantageous. Right? It's amazing. You never hear language like that in studies like this. Here's the conclusion. Now listen carefully to the language. Listen to these 2 sentences. In sum, animal and human studies to date suggest that regular exposure to cannabis may disrupt healthy neurodevelopment, especially in parietal cortices, which underlie higher order cognitive functioning. That's the science sentence. Now listen to the next sentence. Cannabis use may place individuals on a new neurodevelopmental trajectory, resulting in millions of youth who may not reach their full intellectual potential. If you read a lot of these studies, and I do, you recognize that that language is highly unusual. There's the hard science at first, to be sure, but it ends with a kind of dark poetry, the metaphor of a line to potential curving steadily downwards. Think for all of us, parents and teachers, of the perfect developmental storm that we have to work with. You have a teenager whose brain is undergoing critical changes in architecture, enrolled in a school of extraordinary daily rigor, and living in a nation where a newly potent drug which fundamentally changes brain structure and function is being legislated towards legalization and is consequently seen as increasingly low risk by teenagers. That's a critical place for us to understand. Let's move to this question, abuse of prescribed medications. This topic would never have been on any headmaster, any counselor, any doctor's radar screen 15 years ago. It is a relatively new phenomenon, but the use of non-medicinal use of stimulant medications, in particular Adderall, is an important one. Surveys suggest, and by the way, the data is a little bit less robust because it is new, but the surveys suggest that about 7% of 12th graders are using non-medicinal Adderall in a given year. Almost all report getting that from friends or relatives. On secondary and college campuses today, it's called the study drug. Surely and revealingly, the first time slang for a drug was not a pejorative. I would venture to guess that the use is directly proportional to the academic rigor of a school and the motivational level of students. So you're guessing correctly if I'm suggesting that the Tafts and Exeters and Hotchkisses should be talking about this. I was curious about how common stimulant use medication was, so I asked kids, why not? You should be asking. One senior wrote me, students sometimes use for papers, projects, and even homework, especially when the workload gets heavier. Another added, it's somewhat public, especially sometimes called study meds, and mainly situational, meaning at times of high stress and work. A third shared, gender doesn't matter, boys and girls may use, claim it gives an extra edge in staying up late hours to complete work. When asked about how students viewed taking this class of drugs, students shared 2 themes. First, they say that since the drug is so commonly prescribed by physicians, and of course with no ill effects, and indeed for some, evidence of positive consequences, few teenagers, I would say this is true in every school, few view taking that drug as potentially harmful. Second, they have trouble viewing that taking something like Adderall as wrong. It's not viewed as bad like pot or alcohol, one wrote me. They're good kids taking these meds. A senior shared, it's about trying to improve academically, maybe even level the playing field, so it's not really seen as a bad thing. Another said, it's not really seen as negative. It's almost like it shows that kids care about their work, right? It's a really troubling line and one we should listen to. Now, it's fascinating to hear thoughtful students try to explain why doing something that they know intellectually is wrong somehow doesn't feel wrong, despite everything we've said. It's not, and I use that word quote, it's not bad, they say, like smoking pot. They speak as if they're talking about a more potent version of the no-dose pills that we recall from our college days. And you pick up a faint but insistent thread that maybe you're disadvantaged if you're not using the prescribed medication. I said to a student, maybe it's a bit like the steroid use in Major League Baseball. Players felt that they were disadvantaged versus a peer if you were not using the steroid. I thought I was smart, and this made sense. And the student who's smarter than me said, actually, Mr. Mack, it's not quite like that. Steroids were illegal for everyone. Using them was wrong. It would be like steroids in baseball if some but not all the players were actually prescribed steroids by the umpires. It's a remarkable insight. So you can see the challenges this poses for all of you and for me, for every college campus and every school, and I think probably proportionally so depending on the academic rigor of the school. So here's what we have. A drug that is easily available illicitly, which we have appropriately said should not be used without a prescription, and which paradoxically is seen as enhancing a student's ability to achieve our most profoundly held value, academic excellence. I'll close this section with nicotine. This is an area, by the way, where there really is good news. Cigarette use has declined every year since 1997. We are at a historic low for teenage smoking. There is some bad news. One piece is that chewing tobacco remains at a fixed but stubborn low level, particularly among boys. And second, as some of you may know, and the press has picked this up over the last couple of years, as cigarette use has declined, markets abhor a vacuum. E-cigarettes and vaping have moved directly into that vacuum. And we are seeing a completely unregulated industry, one that I think you should view with considerable skepticism, which is trying to pick up that piece of the market share. Today's vaping devices are really sophisticated technologies with a NiCad battery, a heating element, and a vaporizer. Some of these deliver a single dose, if you will. Some are multi-purpose, can be used for aromatics, nicotine, or the THC found in marijuana. They are very successfully marketed today. You cannot go into a convenience store or a gas station without seeing these on the front shelf. The target audience is our kids. Target audience is adolescents and young college folks. There's not much data on it yet. The medical world is frankly split on the use of vaping. But we do know that a small but growing number of teenagers is inhaling unregulated vaporized compounds with a device that can handle multiple uses, including THC. So let me end this first chapter, if you will, which is the longest. I began by saying we need to start with identifying what we're trying to be as a school. And I said, we want to be a campus that's characterized by high health, high energy, and high achievement. And everything should work backwards from there. I argued second, there are a lot of things that make creating that kind of campus a challenge, including distractions from social media, physical health, pressures, family issues, but in particular drugs and alcohol. And then I argued that private schools exist in a national landscape where a majority of teenagers do not use drugs and alcohol, a concerning number do, and that number depends on age and the particulars of the drug. I want to move this, though. If we are going to deal, let's move from looking at the school and the nation and look at what it means to be a teenager. I think that if we're going to deal honestly with the challenges we have of creating this kind of campus, we have to recognize that there are a lot of reasons adolescents use drugs. First, Research shows in the adolescent brain development, and you know this, that one of the last areas to develop, of course, is the frontal cortex, the part that regulates executive functioning like impulse control and risk-taking. There's a reason teenagers make bad choices, including use of drugs. Second, drugs and alcohol are a very effective, a really good social lubricant. The minute and delicate and complicated gears of teenage social life turn a lot easier when those people are using. Adults have a term for it. It's called a cocktail party. And you might think of adolescence as being this really awkward 4-year cocktail party. Third, drugs can be effective in lowering stress, at least in the short term, and dealing with stress is the most commonly cited reason teenagers use. In that sense, drugs work if work means that for a brief period of time the user is not thinking about AP classes, the yield rates at that college, and parental expectations. Fourth, drugs are particularly, I think, attractive to the rule breaker or boundary pusher. It is developmentally appropriate and healthy for adolescents to push at the restrictions around them. We call that growing up, but we have to recognize that drugs and alcohol can be one of the areas that rule breaker or boundary pusher is tempted. And finally, and perhaps the most important, there are no barriers to drugs and alcohol use. Rich or poor, black or white, American or international, day or border, lower mid, senior, boy or girl. In my years here, I've seen, I think, every type of student you could describe have gotten in trouble using drugs or alcohol. When you're a teenager, you just want to belong. And there's a reason educators who observe this say, drugs are the club that anybody can join. So if you're interested in trying to help teenagers stay healthy, and I'm keenly interested in this, you have to begin with the fact that the adolescent is the perfect user. Frontal cortex undeveloped, in need of social lubricant, stressed by family and school, intrigued by rule breaking, and eager to belong, and I think that's the place where you and I should start. And this is the point where if I stopped talking, you would all throw up your hands and say, oh great, thanks a lot. I am not there, and I don't think you should be. There is just way too much opportunity here for us as parents and as a school, and I love being in a place where we are honest and we look in the mirror and we say, this is a real challenge, it's going to take our best work, and we can absolutely have a positive impact. Given this national landscape I've described, and given that the teenager is the perfect user, here's what I think schools should say, and it may be a little bit different than what you hear elsewhere. And I'm not sure every head is talking about this. I think he or she should be. Here's what I think we should say. Kids, you are not going to be able to avoid tough and caring adults who are going to talk to you about how drugs and alcohol are at odds with being healthy, energetic, and achieving. Get used to it. We're not going away. I am a full-on engagement guy, meaning I think we should be really engaged in an honest, caring, trusting, informed conversation. There is no reason for anyone in this room, and no reason anyone in the faculty to be defensive or scared. There are no villains here. There's no blame affixed. And there's no reason to tiptoe around this as if teenagers using drugs and alcohol is breaking news. It's not. I'll offer what I think a school should do if it's really committed to helping the whole student, and I hope you see it here. You should hold me to these things. You should hear on a campus, you should hear complete ethical conviction. As a school, we say that using drugs, alcohol, and nicotine at Taft is wrong, dumb, and bad for you. Not a little bit, not sometimes, not sort of, but very wrong, very dumb, and very bad for you. We need all the grown-ups in the room saying the same thing over and over again with no apology and no negotiation, because moral clarity and confidence is a good thing for teenagers, especially because they don't always like it. You should observe complete unanimity among all stakeholders with this goal. All of us, parents, teachers, students, alumni. We want everyone in agreement about what kind of place we want to be. So we explicitly and publicly and repeatedly state our campus cultural goal and how drugs and alcohol run counter to it. Just in the same way, we say that we strive to be a high integrity school as a campus. We take our honor code seriously, and that we will work hard to meet that. You should see lots of information. You should see lots of information about drugs being shared in many venues. iBlock, through the health center, presentations by the school doctor, dorm faculty, coaches, advisors, yes, by me. You should see diverse and healthy ways in which students can deal with stress in ways that are safe and legal. Students in the exercise room are taking aerobics, fully enrolled yoga and meditation classes, dormitories doing movie nights and feeds, kids walking into town for a snack, a daily schedule that includes time for relaxing, physical spaces and hallways and dorms and dining to encourage gathering and relaxing, and yes, even the rare holiday or snow day. You should feel buy-in among teachers, students, and parents, even, I would argue, pride in creating culture in which every student, every day, potentially can make this a positive place. I've shared with the students not long ago, I like to use the factory floor metaphor where the entire shift takes pride in being a place where it's safe and there has not been an accident. You've perhaps been in a factory where you see that calendar on the wall. And every day, right? Every day the foreman tears off a sheet and proudly, this is our 33rd day in a row that we haven't had an accident. And when they do, the foreman, and I guess that's me, stops. Everything stops. And we say, what went wrong? What can we do differently? I need everybody's help in trying to make things better. I've got that number posted in my head. For the record, as of today, it's 23. And if you ask, can you help? I'd say, of course you can. You tell your son or your daughter, I hope you're not going to be the one that makes us flip that calendar back to zero. You should find on a school shared protocols and understanding of these protocols that help students be safe and healthy. In our case, a sanctuary policy, which you probably know and you should know, that allows a student who is worried about the health of another student to bring him or her into the health center, and there is no suspension, there is no discipline committee meeting. Or our reminder to students over and over again that if they want to share concerns about themselves or another student, they can do that with a teacher, they can do it with a dean, they can do it with an advisor or a school counselor. And most of all, and this is my main point, you should find lots of evidence that there is an ongoing conversation. That's what today is. I should be clear. You should see conversation taking place all the time on the school. If the school is perpetually talking honestly, I think optimistically and clearly about community health and drug and alcohol use, something good is happening. I'm a firm believer that some kinds of talks are hard and you need to keep at them. That's why you need to practice a lot. There is, frankly, a pretty high failure rate in talking to teenagers about drug use. It's kind of the way they're with parents giving the kids the sex talk. You get better at it with practice. If it feels like cruel and unusual punishment, remember that it feels a lot less cruel as it gets more usual. Over and over again, you must have this conversation. And by the way, as some of you know this, the car ride's a good place to have it, isn't it? That they're captive. They can't go away. We need to ask lots of questions, and we have to make space for all kinds of answers, meaning you have to do at least as much listening as you do judging. Open-ended questions. Is it hard to be sober at a school? What do you do with the stress you have? You ever felt tempted to use a stimulant medication? We have to be willing, I think, to speak honestly and with a candor that means caring. I think that in some ways the delicate polishing of school reporting in past decades has not helped us. Schools used to speak much more frankly with parents than they do today. I found in his memoirs, Taft wrote, I tried very hard to tell the exact truth, and I soon acquired the reputation of writing very pessimistic letters. Maybe so, but I bet that helped boys grow up well. Perhaps we need more reports like my favorite comment, which was mailed home to parents. Your son is every inch a fool. Fortunately, he's not very tall. I like the advisor letter that a wonderfully tough and loving teacher wrote. This is a Taft teacher wrote years ago. Quote, unfortunately, some concern about her partying on the campus has been expressed by the faculty in the dorm. I've talked to her about this matter and about how foolish this type of behavior is at this stage of her career. I hope she heard me. That's a really helpful letter, isn't it? That is clear that some good conversations have taken place, and I can tell you another one's about to start. So we need to have a high level of trust. After all, we all want the same thing. We want an energetic, healthy, achieving culture, and we want really safe and productive and achieving children. In my years, I've occasionally called up parents to say, don't take offense, you know me, you need to trust me. My left elbow feel tells me your child must be smoking pot. He looks like hell. Grades are dropping. He quit the team. There's a lot of concern out there. You know what? I'm worried he's going to get kicked out. Let's talk about what we can do to help him. I hope that if you get that concern, you're going to call me. We should not be afraid to say that Taft teenagers, like many across the country and around the globe, have high-stake choices to make at a period of their lives when they're only just beginning cognitively to be able to make them, that they will be regularly exposed to drugs and alcohol and be bombarded with images throughout the media, and that they will feel several powerful reasons to use. And so the more adults are willing to engage in tough and honest and caring and informed conversation, the better. I will promise you we will do this as a school, but I cannot do it alone. So I began with Horace Taft venting about boys smoking and breaking the rules, that thorn in his flesh, and I'll close there. It never got easier for him. In the summer of 1931, after battling a long illness, his great friend Sherman Thatcher retired. And that summer in July, Horace Taft wrote him a letter, perhaps thinking maybe even a little bit enviously about how his dear friend was no longer preparing for another year of school. He wrote, "As for me, Sherman, I'm just hammering away in the beaten paths." Thatcher died 2 weeks later. This is the last letter we have of that wonderful correspondence, but it's a good letter. There's a touch of fatigue in Taft, you hear that, but there's a good bit more resolve. There's a lot in our work here that is lofty and luminous, but frankly, there are some areas of boarding school which are not problems you solve, but dilemmas you manage. Grittily stubborn challenges that require a stubborn, muscular perseverance. What I spoke of today, what we aspire to be and the challenges that we face, that's an example of the latter. But it's where we must do some of our best work as teachers and parents, and I think all we can do is to keep hammering away on the wondrous beaten path of adolescence. And my hope is that we can hammer away at that together, because this is work that we need to do together, and I think this is a school and your parents that can partner with us in making this happen. So with that, and I hope this was helpful, taking on a topic that is not often taken on explicitly. If you're interested in receiving copy, please let me know. I'm always love thoughts and reactions. If you want to call me up or email me on any piece of it or suggestions, I would love to hear those. Many thanks. Thanks for all you do for Taft, and have a great weekend. Thank you.